Welcome in. It is Big Ten Today. We are presented by Gatorade on this Friday. Great to have you with us. Dave Revson, Andy Katz, after a night that changed the complexion of the top of the conference race.
Look, if you are a fan or an administrator in the Big Ten, maybe weren't cheering for it, but you're pretty thrilled because this significantly helps Nebraska. You want more teams in the field. I think we can feel pretty comfortable that this could be that sixth team potentially. If you're Wisconsin, a disastrous second half, overtime loss. Bottom line is that they'll be fine. They got to have a short memory. Big time matchup for first place on Sunday against Purdue. And it just keeps going for both teams, really, because Nebraska's got Illinois Northwestern. But this was significant for the Huskers and for the Badgers. I think they'll be fine.
Yeah, no doubt. Huge showdown, though, for them at the Kohl Center on Sunday. Mike Sikorski is with us as well. He's going to be with us every Friday between now and Selection Sunday as we start thinking about bracketology. And Mike, just kind of curious, how much did you have to rework things after that win for the Huskers last night?
Well, I was tempted to switch Wisconsin from the 2 line to the 3 line and elevate Kansas, but there were enough justifications for Wisconsin staying there, mostly metrically with their Ken Pom ranking and their strength of record ranking, things like that, that I was able to keep it where it was. But we all know by Monday we'll know for sure what would be the position as of now. With Wisconsin playing Purdue, that's a huge one for them. And then Kansas has Houston, which is a number 1 seed. So those are 2 huge matchups that will really dictate where those teams stand come Tuesday's bracket.
And we're going to look ahead to a very intriguing weekend here throughout the show. But our big story is that Nebraska win over the Badgers. They did it in dramatic fashion, rallying from 19 down in the first half to win it in overtime. They were down 16 at the break, but just kept battling. Amazingly, it was the first time since 2002 that a top 10 team had lost a game it led by 16 or more points at the half. That was a span of 1,458 games. Mike, an incredible second half, a milestone win for Fred Hoiberg's team. 2 top 6 wins now this year. Remember, they beat Purdue in Lincoln as well. It's the first time they've beaten 2 top 6 teams in nearly 70 years. What stood out to you about the Huskers win and the way they did it?
Well, Dave, last weekend I did some research on C.J. Wilcher, and I didn't end up getting to use it. We don't want to waste any effort here at Big Ten Network. So what did C.J. do but come back last night and dump even more beautiful numbers on top of what he'd already done? And speaking of no wasted effort, this is a guy who needs less room, less freedom to get off a great three-point shot than anybody in college basketball, and he's about as good at making them as anybody. He is shooting 58% from three-point range since we returned to Big Ten play in early January, and last night, 5 of 7 from deep, a huge part of being able to make that comeback against Wisconsin.
Well, and we sat here on Thursday and talked about Wisconsin's sometimes inability to get out on the shooters. They did a great job on Tominaga. I mean, he was 1 for 7.
Right.
And so if you go into this game and say the one guy that's going to beat us is C.J. Wilcher, hitting threes, and they're actually going to take 27 threes, you might have taken that gamble if you're the Badgers.
And only hit 9 of them. And to your point, Tominaga gets 2 points. I think it speaks volumes about Nebraska on the defensive end. It speaks volumes about their bench. I mean, they did so many other things when the guy who I think most of us would look at as their superstar had a almost invisible night.
Yeah, but I mean, I think the number that Greg Gard is circling this morning as he was discussing in his postgame news conference is the 16 turnovers.
Right.
Because that is uncharacteristic of Wisconsin. You have to literally beat them. They usually don't hand it to you. And in the second half and overtime, obviously, they let Nebraska come back into this game, and Nebraska won it by making big-time plays. The other real positive for the Huskers is now we have seen consistent production from Mast. I mean, obviously he had moments, and now, I mean, again, another significant outing for him, getting 20 in this game, really outplaying the Badger bigs, and so that's huge, for them going forward.
Yeah, Rick Mast was tremendous here, hit a couple big shots. I mean, that step-back 3 was just an amazing shot. He had a beautiful baby hook on the baseline as well. I still come back to, and again, look, I think what's great about this league this year is of the 6 teams right now that appear to be NCAA tourney teams, the 6 that will appear in Mike's bracket as of this morning. 5 of them are better offensively, more efficient offensively than they are defensively. And I think that's why we've seen, Mike, a lot of really great shot making down the stretch in games this year. I feel like Big Ten teams have won games more than, the losing team has lost them, if that makes sense. Like it really has come down to some big time offensive moments. But you look at what Nebraska did on the defensive end, like Wisconsin's one of the most efficient offenses in the country. There's 0.8 points per possession in that second half. And then Andy talked about the turnovers. I do think shot making was huge, but Nebraska turned up the defense in the second half, and that's what won them the game.
Yeah, they did a great defensive job, and they really made the Badgers uncomfortable. In addition to the crowd, I think the crowd certainly played into it.
Right.
They call it the vault now. I like that. They call it the vault, and the crowd was outstanding and really rattled Wisconsin. And that's not easy to do. I mean, there are teams that you can get to be made uncomfortable when they go on the road, but that's not Wisconsin. That's not typical of them. But not only did they throw the ball out of bounds on basic plays, they took difficult shots. And the one that I come back to, maybe more than any, I don't remember the exact score at the time, but Stephen Crow on the left wing was running a 2-man game with Chucky Hepburn, and Chucky got it to him, got the ball to him, and then moved toward the left. And Stephen was wide open. There was nobody near him after that action. And he didn't even look at the goal. Did not even look to see if he was open. And if he takes that shot, maybe he makes it. They wound up with nothing, virtually nothing, because the shot clock was running down. So Stephen wasn't aware he was open. He wasn't aware of the shot clock situation. That is so anti-Wisconsin. They got a lot to learn. They can learn a lot, I should say, from that particular game, because they've showed that's possible, but it's certainly not who they are.
So one other critical thing is to not treat this game by itself in its own silo. Look at the bigger picture of this week. The importance of this win for Nebraska is what is up ahead.
100%.
So now, at Illinois, at Northwestern, if you lose those 2 games, it's okay. I mean, it's not the end of the world, because you just beat Wisconsin. As you said, you've already beaten Purdue. You've already beaten Michigan State. You've already beaten Northwestern. All teams in your neighborhood that we're going to project are in the field, Mike and I and everyone else. So these are positive developments for Nebraska. They have non-conference, that road win at K-State. So now you lose these 2 upcoming against teams that are also in the field. As long as you play well, which I would expect they would, that's okay.
Right, and I think even more so to your point, again, I mean, they very well could go to Illinois and Northwestern and win both those games. I don't think any of us is assuming it, but we know how hard it is to win on the road in the Big Ten. They had just dropped a road game previous to that against Maryland, and so now you come home and you have one of your toughest home games of the year, and to figure out a way to win it and avoid even that possibility of, man, this thing could really spiral here.
Because if they don't come back, now you're looking at potentially 3 in a row.
Right, exactly. No, a really big win for them. So here's what it means for the Big Ten race. Purdue is now a half game up on the Badgers. So Purdue back in first place. And as we've been talking about, those 2 plays Sunday in Madison. Illinois is now just a game back in the loss column. They're a game ahead of Northwestern. And Nebraska's a half game behind the Cats, 3 teams behind them at 5-5. Mike, I'm interested in your take. I'm interested in both of your takes. I'll start with you, though, Mike. How many teams legitimately do you believe are in the discussion to win the Big Ten? Like, is it just Purdue and Wisconsin? Could Illinois win it? Do you believe anyone behind them could move up and win it?
Well, mathematically, there are probably 4 or 5 that could do it. And probably in terms of basketball, there are 2 beyond the obvious that could do it as well. I don't think you can rule out Northwestern or Illinois, but I think we all know that the most likely scenario is that either Wisconsin or Purdue wins it, and that the most likely scenario is Purdue winning it. But those teams, they don't have to stand back and allow that to happen. They've all shown that they're capable of either beating Purdue or playing with the Boilermakers. So it's a very fascinating league race. We may see a little bit more separation if Purdue is able to go into Kohl Center on Sunday and get that W. We might see a little more separation from the Boilers, but I thought a week ago that we didn't have to sort of grant anything to Purdue or to Wisconsin, that the others were still in it. And I think Illinois and Northwestern can feel very much alive in this race.
You know, unfortunately, this is the unbalanced schedules, and we have to get used to it. It's going to be even more so when it goes to 18. Illinois only plays Wisconsin once. It's on the road, so that's a disadvantage. They have the second game against Purdue. They've already lost one at Mackey. Played very well, obviously, in that game. So their schedule does not play well for the Illini. For Wisconsin, they've got two opportunities, home and road against Purdue. So it's in front of them if they want to win the Big Ten regular season title. But one thing I think, and we talked about this, and I know Mike would agree with me on this, is we could definitely have a scenario where Wisconsin or Illinois were to win the Big Ten regular season title, but Purdue would be a higher seed in the NCAA tournament. Could be a 1 or a 2, and yet Wisconsin and Illinois. So we got to remind everyone that the standings do not necessarily dictate the seeding in the NCAA tournament.
Yes, the standings are for the seeding as we get to
But sometimes people forget that.
Oh, certainly that is it's a point worth remembering. There's so much that's done in terms of your strength of schedule in the non-conference. Purdue's played the toughest schedule in the country, which will absolutely help them in terms of their seeding. And Mike, you think about Purdue down the stretch, too, as we talk about kind of who might end up winning the Big Ten. Yes, they still have to go to Wisconsin on Sunday. They have to go to Illinois as well. But if you were to look at Bartorvik's site, which takes the schedules going forward, they have the easiest schedule of those three teams if you're looking at Wisconsin, Illinois, and Purdue going forward. So kind of even more to your point, it does feel like it sets up nicely now for Purdue after what happened last night.
Yeah, and I think that's something to keep the Boilermakers engaged through February and early March. The Big Ten title has always meant a ton to the Boilermakers and to their fans and to the paint crew, going all the way back to Gene Cady. It's always meant a lot that they've won that as consistently as they have. And I think you need to keep March out of Purdue's minds because of all the teams in the country, based on what happened last year and what happened the year before and the year before that. And what they have, how good they are, what they're capable of. March is always looming for them. And so having the league race to focus on, I think could be good for them. And they can focus on trying to be ready each night to continue to get better and continue to win games in this league. And then let March get to you when it gets to you, and not necessarily sit there and wonder about, okay, this is all cool, but we still have to play that first round game in the NCAAs.
And that's a great point because I've been to Mackey many times in the last 2 years. You see those Big Ten titles. They mean something to them. And they have a chance, which is not easy in this league, doesn't happen often, to be back-to-back regular season and tournament champs. And that does mean something to Purdue.
Right. Remember, they won the regular season going away last year. And then, as you say, backed it up with the tournament title as well. Big Ten action this weekend starts with Ohio State and Iowa tonight over on FS1. 4 games tomorrow. We have Northwestern Minnesota and Rutgers Michigan. Maryland Michigan State's a big one. And then Sunday, that showdown between the Boilers and Badgers. Plus, I'll be in Champaign with Robbie Hummel for the Huskers and the Fighting Illini. Let's run through a few of these games. Dave Revson back with Andy Katz and Mike DeCourcy. Let's start with Ohio State and Iowa. And this one tonight, Mike, at least for me, has a little bit of a must-win feel, I'd say, for both of these teams. How do you see it?
Yeah, I think that Iowa was just starting to trend toward contention for the bracket when they lost at Indiana this week. That was a big loss for them, and this would be one that they would have to get, especially at home. And the Buckeyes just need to get back to being the capable basketball team that we saw in November and December. To me, this is like the shot selection derby because Ohio State has struggled with shot selection for a month. They've not run their offense to conclusion on too many occasions. On too many occasions, they have taken guarded, tough shots, tough twos, or even tough threes that are guarded. I think that's something that's been a problem for them, and not as big a problem for Iowa, but I thought late in that game that Peyton Sandford, who I absolutely admire as a shooter, I think he's wonderful, but he took shots he didn't have to take in that game when they were still competitive and still could have gotten back into it. I don't think that'll be as big a problem at home, and Indiana's probably a more significant defensive team at this point than Ohio State is. But he's got to make sure that when he's taking, like, I don't have a problem with him shooting from 30 if he's open. That's who he is. But he was taking the 25-footer with a guy in his grill, and that was problematic at the end of the Hoosiers game.
You know, look, I think we talked about this on Thursday. Ohio State needs to play with confidence. They've lost it. It's eerily similar to a year ago. This team is one of the younger teams, not just in the Big Ten, but in the country. And that's something you talked to Chris Holtman about. They added really only one really older guy in Jamison Battle because Mahaffey is a younger player. So the confidence of the sophomore class is rattled right now. And they got to go on the road. They're going to have to score well enough against Iowa because you're not going to win a game in the 50s against them. You need to get it because they're going to score in 70, 80, 90 points. But I think this is a big confidence game for the Buckeyes. If they could steal this game, they have a chance. There's still enough runway for them to flip the script on this season. A year ago, it got way out of hand, and they didn't have enough time. They played well back in the tournament, but they just ran out of runway. They still have time. Yeah. With the second half of the schedule. They have the talent, and this would be a significant win if they could get it.
They just have to play better on the road. They have to defend better on the road. They've defended so poorly away from home. Last 3 games now, they've given up 83 or more points, and now you're facing Iowa, who is so good offensively. So it's a tall task for Ohio State, but we have seen what they are capable of, particularly in that game of the non-conference against Alabama, which holds up as a really good win. Penn State and Indiana, they are both fresh off nice wins. To me, the big question here is unclear kind of who's going to play, right? Xavier Johnson went down with a really scary-looking injury in that win over Iowa. Malik Renew hobbled off the court early in that game. And then for Penn State, Kanye Clary did not play at all in their impressive road win over Rutgers. What, if anything, do we know about injury status here?
Well, just got an update from Penn State. There is no update on Clary, so we don't know. All right. We don't know if he can go. As for Indiana, Mike Woodson had his press availability on Friday, has said that Xavier Johnson's injury is an elbow injury. I think everyone thought it was either wrist or forearm with the way he landed, but it's an elbow injury. No indication that he's out for the season or anything like that. They just said status unknown. And as for Malik Renew, it is an ankle injury. Now, they did not practice on Thursday, but they're not saying that they're definitely out for this game on Saturday. So that would be good news if it's a maybe, because it looked like it was really bad. And the way they came back and were still able to beat Iowa at home, that gives them hope. Penn State now is playing with a ton of confidence after going into Rutgers and winning that game. So they are feeling, even without Clary, we can go on the road and potentially win a game. We've got the guard play because you could argue if Clary were to come back, they'd have better guard play, no question about it. And can they hold their own inside? That's the big question because Khalil Ware is obviously the dominant presence in these between the two teams.
Right, and I would agree. Obviously, the advantage for Indiana is in the front court. The advantage for Penn State is in the backcourt. I think where it gets interesting for me, Mike, is the thing that Penn State does the best, which is turn teams over, is an area where Indiana struggles mightily. And if, in fact, they are without Xavier Johnson, that exacerbates the issue as well.
Yeah, if there's no X, then Gabe Cupps becomes really important. And to me, it's almost as much about what they do if and when they break the press as it is on how frequently they're able not to turn it over when that pressure's in place. They have to be able to be disciplined enough to make sure that just because they get through it, if you can punish it, punish it. But if you get through and you see an open shot, that doesn't necessarily mean it's a quality shot. A lot of times that's what pressing teams want you to do is take that quick shot before everybody's set and they can grab the rebound and go back the other way. And another way to deal with this is simply, you can't shut out the Nittany Lions, but to limit their offensive opportunities, to make it hard for them to score, to play the great defense that has been relatively constant for IU. They have played very effective defense for most of this year. It's been the one thing. You saw it last week in that Illinois road game. They were terrific defensively, really took Illinois out of what they wanted to do. And so if they play that significant defense and make it hard for the Nittany Lions to score, then that press doesn't wind up in your face as often.
They have dominated Penn State in Bloomington, 23-3 all time against the Nittany Lions there. Penn State hasn't won there in a decade. Maryland and Michigan State. This is the second time they will have played in 2 weeks here, Mike. Michigan State, remember, winning. They got the huge stop. Jameer Young turned the ball over late in College Park. What are you expecting here in the rematch as they play in East Lansing?
Well, as much in a different way, this is one of those games that's kind of a must-win as well, because the Spartans have those terrific performance metrics. They've played so well from possession to possession, but not necessarily so well from game to game. They've got the Ken Palm and net all figured out, but they aren't winning at the level that they need to. So this is a game against a team that is trying to become relevant and that defensively has been outstanding over the last month or so. And it should be really difficult for the Spartans to run what they run or want to run, given the way the Terps have played. You're going to have to see excellent offensive performances by players like Tyson Walker and Malik Hall for the Spartans to prevail.
Positive. Because I think that that if Maryland loses this game, because I think Maryland has the best chance of any of those other teams if there is a seventh bid to get out of the Big Ten, it's Maryland, I think, based on the schedule, the way they're playing, they're defending. And they can lose this road game as long as they take care of all their home games remaining, which would include a sweep of Illinois. I think they definitely could be in position to win a game or two in the tournament to get more quality wins. For the Spartans, again, I'm not worried about them, but they got to take care of their home games. And this is another one. This would give them a sweep of Maryland. Take care of their home games, maybe win another game or two on the road, and they'll be fine.
It's an interesting bracketology game. No question about it. I mean, if Maryland wins this game, it's 3 quad 1 wins for them. You know, all of a sudden you start
on the road. Significant road wins.
Right, no doubt. So let's segue then into bracketology. It's the way we work here. Just released this morning, Mike DeCourcy's latest bracket for Fox Sports. Purdue remains the #1 overall seed, as they have been for quite some time. Wisconsin, as Mike was talking about off the top of the show, despite the loss last night, they're still on that 2 line. Illinois gets a protected seed as well. They're a 4. Then there are 3 more teams in as of now. Northwestern's a 7. Nebraska's a 9. They're up a line after that win last night. And Michigan State is an 11 seed. So, Mike, let's run through a few of these. I said, as you told me, that Purdue is the #1 overall seed. My question for you is, how solid is that right now? Are they the clear-cut #1 overall seed, or did you have a decision to make?
No, I think right now they are a clear-cut #1 seed based on accomplishment, the identity of the teams they've defeated, the identity of the teams that have defeated them, not being particularly problematic, both teams in the field that were on the road. So from that standpoint, they have everything. There's a couple of things to think about with that, though. First of all, there's UConn, which has playing relatively dominant basketball in the Big East. If they continue to do that, sentiment, they're the reigning champions, plus the dominance, maybe that puts them ahead of Purdue in the end. The other thing is Houston, which right now has great metrics. They're in predictive metrics, they are across the board #1 in the ones that the NCAA has in the committee room, the ones that are on the team sheet. Across the board, #1. Net, Ken Palm, BPI, #1. But what the advantage to them is down the stretch. They haven't the level, even close to the level of opponents that Purdue has defeated to this point. But down the stretch, they have 8 quad 1 opportunities. Purdue has 5. That's where Houston could make up that ground. And the other thing that you have to note, though, is it really doesn't matter this year, because Houston's going to want to be in the South. UConn's going to want to be in the East, and Boston, they don't want to be in Detroit. Purdue wants to be in Detroit. So kind of everybody can get the flavor of ice cream that they prefer.
Isn't it nice when it works out that way? To this point, Purdue, most difficult schedule in the country per Ken Palm, as I mentioned, but interesting when you note how much tougher it is for Houston here going forward. We talked about Wisconsin and the fact that they did not drop off that 2 line after that loss last night. You were discussing the balancing act between them and Kansas. I guess my question for you was, we were talking a little bit about Wisconsin as a potential 1 seed before that loss last night to Nebraska. Were they to beat Purdue? Can they get back in that conversation, or have they been relegated now to maybe a barring, finishing undefeated or something like that, that a 2 is kind of where they're going to be at highest.
I'll be honest, I'd never really thought of them in that category at that point. I suppose if they had beaten Purdue on Sunday and not lost to Nebraska the other night, I would have thought differently and maybe considered them. But I think it's a pretty far trek from the 1 line to the 2 line this year.
Okay.
With Carolina being where they are, Carolina's probably the most vulnerable of the 4 at this point. But of course, they have Duke on Saturday, and if they get that one, that'll reinforce and sort of erase some of the stain of the Georgia Tech loss. So I think it's a pretty fair distance between 1 and 2. I think it'll be hard for Wisconsin to get to a 1 line based on who they've been. Who they've been is usually who you're going to be. Honestly, for Wisconsin, that's exactly who they want to be. They're happy at a 2 seed.
Yeah.
That would be a tremendous year. Now, a 2 seed may involve, as Andy mentioned before, doing enough in the league to either get a share or the outright championship of the conference. But I think that in terms of the way they've played to date, if they can carry that through, they're going to end up on a 2 or a 3 line, and they're going to be fine.
One more I want to ask you about is Illinois. What's notable to you about the Illini's resume?
Well, one of the things that's interesting is they are under 500 against Quad 1, which is why I've been reluctant to move them up to the top 3 lines, to presumably a 3rd seed. There's been a spot open on the 3 seed line. It's been filled recently by Kentucky, Baylor, neither of which has an overwhelming resume. When you get to that point on the bracket, which I guess would be the 12th spot, it gets a little lean. So Illinois could certainly fill that, but they need to have a great February to make that climb. What they've done to date has been fine, but one of the things that I found was really interesting is they lost their 3 toughest games to date. And it's really hard to pitch them as a 3 seed unless they start winning those really high quality games, the ones that teams like Purdue and Wisconsin have won. And frankly, even all the way deep into the field, Nebraska has won a lot of those tough games to this point. Northwestern has won a lot of those tough games. Illinois has to step forward and do that as well.
I'd say for Illinois, last 3 games of the year are all quad 1s for them, including Wisconsin and Purdue. So there's certainly, as you say, a lot of chances to enhance that resume. Got men's hoops tomorrow. Northwestern travels to Minnesota, followed by Rutgers and Michigan. Don't miss a Big Ten hoops doubleheader. That's tomorrow, only on the Big Ten Network and the Fox Sports app. Let's break down those games. And Mike, we'll start with Northwestern and Minnesota. Interested to see how Northwestern responds here. They had the really emotional game at Purdue. It's a short turnaround. It's a road game. Minnesota has had the week off here to get ready for this one. Feels to me like this would already be a big challenge for Northwestern, but even more so given the calendar and going on the road.
Yeah, Northwestern's, it's all about their approach to this game, how they take the momentum that they built in the Purdue game and apply it to this. If they can bring that level of effort and performance, I think they should be pretty confident that they could get a road win here. But in a lot of cases, as we've seen over the decades in college basketball, you lose a tough game like that in overtime against a great team like Purdue, and then it's really hard to manufacture that same effort. This is where Boo Buie and his excellence as a veteran point guard can really make a difference. With the exception of the Nebraska game when he shot 2 of 15, he's been really good on the road. He was brilliant against Purdue, and so he needs to be the best version of himself and have everybody else follow along.
Again, I'm not worried, okay? First of all, they had one bad road game in the month of January that was at Illinois. I walked out with them the other night at Mackey talking to Brooks Barnheiser. They are very confident. They know they're a really good basketball team. You heard the effusive praise from Matt Painter. They're fired up. There's no question they're fired up. Ty Berry's playing at a high level. They're the better team. Now, does that translate to a win? We shall see. But I don't think they're going to come out flat in this game at all.
Yeah.
They are prepared.
No, it should be interesting. Minnesota struggles with turnovers. That's an area where Northwestern's really good. They don't turn it over themselves, and they force a lot. But again, Northwestern just 1-4 on the road in the league. Mike, last game, 2 teams really in need of a win, Rutgers and Michigan. How do you see this one playing out? What are you watching here?
There's been a lot of criticism of Rutgers coach Steve Peichel recently, and I think that some of it misses the mark because for me this is really about building toward next year with the 2 great recruits coming in, 2 top 10 recruits. They need to have a base of players that can help those players adapt quickly. And that starts on the perimeter, and their performance against Penn State on the perimeter the other night was really weak. They were 3 of 17 combined from the field, the 4 perimeter players that go with Cliff Amore. It's got to be better than that. And as a team, they turned it over 19 times. Now, I know that's what Penn State does to you, but you're playing basically 4 ball handlers. It's got to be better than that. And those guys need to get it together because you got to have great players for those young freshmen next year to come in and join.
I mean, come on. There was criticism from a columnist, maybe another writer. They're spoiled. Rutgers has been in position to be in the NCAA tournament the last 4 years, missed it last year. They got the top 3 recruiting class coming in. They got hurt by their portal by more than any other team in the Big Ten, losing Mulcahy and Cam Spencer. They're having a down year. They're very competitive. I think the criticism was ridiculous.
Strong words. I tend to agree with you. I mean, if you look at where they were 10 years ago and where they are now. I mean,
spoiled New Jersey columnist.